Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Tuesday the 6th of September. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. I'm sorry that we started a little late this evening. The weather's been pretty wild here on the East Coast this afternoon. I hope that you're safe and sound and haven't been washed away. This evening I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 195 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Gazprom has said that Russia's biggest natural gas pipeline to Europe will not resume pumping until Siemens Energy repairs faulty equipment. Siemens Energy said an oil leak at the Portovaya compressor station did not warrant keeping the pipeline closed. The backup power line at the Russian-held Zaporizhia power plant in Ukraine has been disconnected in order to extinguish a fire, officials said on Monday. However, the International Atomic Energy Agency said the line itself was not damaged and that the backup line will be reconnected once the fire has been extinguished. An expert mission from the IAEA is due to release their findings from the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in a detailed report later today. 4 of the 6 UN mission members at the plant have left the site, and the remaining 2 IAEA experts will stay on a permanent basis. The Kremlin has said that Russia-UK relations will not improve under the leadership of Liz Truss. Ukraine's forces are conducting counter-offensive actions in the east and southeast of the country, Alexei Arestovich, a senior Ukrainian presidential advisor, has said. The Russian Defense Ministry is in the process of buying rockets and artillery shells from North Korea to support its invasion of Ukraine, according to US intelligence. A US official said the fact Russia was turning to North Korea demonstrated that the Russian military continues to suffer from severe supply shortages in Ukraine, due in part to export controls and sanctions. The jailed Russian opposition politician and anti-corruption activist Alexei Navalny's chief of staff has said that worsening prison conditions are threatening his health. Ukraine's southern offensive has prompted Kherson occupiers to pause a planned referendum on whether to become part of Russia. And Ukraine has repelled Russian offensives in the east, as well as hindering Russian positions near Kramatorsk, a key town in the eastern Donetsk region, its armed forces said in a situational update. The update also said that Ukrainian troops had disrupted Russian crossings near Kherson and from using long-range artillery in Kharkiv. Now, we're lucky enough to be joined this evening by a fantastic guest, Marion Fellows MP. Marion has been the SNP MP for Motherwell and Wishaw since the 2015 general election. In January 2020, she was appointed the SNP spokesperson for disabilities. Also since January 2020, she has been a member of the Speakers Committee for the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, and since March 2020, she has been a member of the House of Commons Administration Committee. Marion, good evening. How are you keeping?
Good evening, Andrew. Well, I'm keeping fine. I'm just trying not to run about too much. It's been a bit of an impossibility today with everything that's been going on here.
A bit of a circus, absolutely, today. Well, thank you for taking the time for joining us this evening. We're really very grateful to you. Our first story this evening is that a combined rent freeze and moratorium on evictions to help people through the cost of living crisis has been announced as the centrepiece of the 2022-23 programme for government. The programme outlines emergency legislation which will be introduced to put in place a rent freeze until at least 31st March 2023 and a moratorium on evictions, as well as a new tenants' rights campaign. In addition, a one-stop shop website will be introduced to provide people with information on the range of benefits and support available to help them through the current cost of living crisis. With £3 billion allocated to the end of March for a range of support that will help mitigate the impact of the cost crisis on households, the programme for government also confirms the Scottish Child Payment will increase to £25 per week per eligible child from the 14th of November, when it also opens to all under-16s. In addition, the programme includes the rollout of free school meals across all primary school age groups, doubles the Fuel Insecurity Fund to £20 million to help households at risk of self-disconnection or self-rationing of energy, confirms rail fares will be frozen until March 2023, and widens the Warmer Homes Fuel Poverty Programme. For businesses, in addition to an existing package of financial aid worth over £800 million, 6 groundbreaking tech scalers will also be opened. 2 job-boosting green ports progressed, and the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, focusing on economy-supporting measures, will continue. In total, the programme for government sets out 18 new bills, including legislation on an independence referendum and major reforms in the justice system, including a criminal justice reform bill that will propose the end of the not proven verdict in Scots law and also provide anonymity for complainers in sexual offence cases. A bill for the creation of a new national care service will also go through Parliament this year. The programme also builds on long-term commitments made in the Boot House Agreement and restates ministers' commitments to the importance of delivering on Scotland's climate ambitions. These range from a consultation on legislation to transform how buildings are heated, to continuing record investment in active travel. The First Minister warned that the magnitude of what is being experienced by people and businesses means that mitigation is nowhere near sufficient. What is needed now is action on a scale similar to the initial COVID response. However, she pointed out that the powers to act in the manner and on the scale needed do not lie with the Scottish Parliament, but are reserved to Westminster. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said, "This programme for government is published in the context of the most severe cost crisis in many of our lifetimes. It is a crisis pushing millions into poverty and poses a genuine danger, not just to livelihoods, but to lives." So, Marion, firstly, the contrast there between 18 bills being proposed in the programme for government and at the same time the scale of the crisis, the most severe cost crisis in many of our lifetimes, as Nicola Sturgeon put it, the conflict between a programme for government being established now and then the likely need for the Scottish Government to continue to react and respond to circumstances as the crisis unfolds. What do you think are the prospects for the majority of the programme for government even surviving in the next year?
I think I'd need a ball to give you a definitive answer. I think what the programme for government does, it shows the difference between Scottish Government and UK Government, even from what the little that Liz Truss has already said today. Scottish Government is there to support people in the worst cost of living crisis we've ever felt, and small businesses, other businesses, and to really try and make a difference in people's lives. Whereas Liz Truss about spades and how she dig us out of our trouble and how she's going to, reduce income tax for the wealthiest in the country. There is a complete lack of understanding in this government and in the previous Tory governments we've had, that how real people live and how this cost of living and energy cost crisis is actually going to impact on real people. They just don't get it. And I think I'm talking to government whips, ministers today, or we're not sure who minister at the moment, but talking to folk who've been in government and folk like IDS, who I didn't speak to, but and he's refusing. Ian Duncan Smith's a government job that I fear. I fear that Liz Truss is going to have the worst start of any Prime Minister, and that she doesn't get the absolute immediacy of what she needs to do.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marion. We will be talking about the new Prime Minister at length in a
Andrew,
moment.
I've lost you.
Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, Marion?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
No problem. That's good.
Yeah. Yes.
We'll be talking
Yes.
about Liz Truss in length in a moment.
Yes, I can hear you, but obviously you hear me. Yeah.
I can hear you now. Don't worry. The cost of we'll talk at length about Liz Truss in a moment. I think your point though about the contrast in priorities between Westminster and Holyrood, and the determination in Holyrood to do everything that is possible within the limited powers to protect those who are most at risk. Is that why we've found the combined rent freeze and moratorium on evictions front and centre of the programme for government this year?
Yes, I mean, it's not a surprise to anyone listening or watching this that the Scottish Government hands are tied in so many areas. So what that has to be is a pragmatic approach and doing the very best we can to support our people in Scotland against the worst, probably living memory, the worst cost of living crisis. And folks say that, and I say it all the time, but it actually means people in Scotland are having to choose, in some cases, between heating and eating. Small businesses can't pay and won't be able to pay their increased electricity costs, gas costs, fuel costs, and businesses will suffer, and then that will lead to unemployment. We need a radical rethink, and as the First Minister has said, we need to think about this as an emergency, just like COVID, and to produce something that helps everyone, not just the richest in our communities.
Thanks, Marion. And also the First Minister also said today that this current crisis highlights starkly the pressing need for independence. She said that we are being reminded every day that where and in whose hands power lies really, and where and in whose hands power lies really matters. She continued, this crisis is much worse in the UK than in other developed countries because of a
Yes.
Brexit that Scotland voted against but was powerless to stop. So, do you think is the First Minister's message with regard to the pressing need for independence, is it getting through to voters? Do you think?
Well, I think it's starting to, but I think this has to be the job of folk like me and folk like Broadcasting Scotland to get that message out there, because for the Scottish Government to simply keep trying to mitigate the worst that the UK Government is doing is not feasible in the long term. We need to be able to bring forward a programme for government that actually we can fund and that we can press forward with. Because every time we do something in Scotland, it then means that there's something else that can't be done because we have no borrowing powers and because we are stuck in this rut of actually mitigating the worst excesses of the absolute worst set of governments we've had in a very long time, and governments that none of us have voted for.
Completely, Marion. Completely. Thank you. Now then, let's move on to talk about Liz Truss because she has become the UK's new Prime Minister after meeting the Queen at Balmoral, where she was asked to form a government after the earlier resignation of Boris Johnson. Truss returned immediately to Downing Street to give an address to the nation before beginning to appoint her cabinet. One of her first significant acts as Prime Minister is expected to be an announcement on plans to tackle the energy price crisis, with allies understood to be discussing a £100 billion package to freeze bills. The package could come as soon as Thursday and is expected to be paid via extra borrowing rather than a windfall tax on energy suppliers, as Labour has proposed. In remarks outside Downing Street this morning, the outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that he would remain loyal and supportive to Truss after his departure, describing himself as a booster rocket that has fulfilled its function and would now crash into the Pacific Ocean. So, Marion, firstly, we now have the fourth Tory Prime Minister in 6 years. Is that an indication of a fundamental instability in the UK political system, or is it instead symptomatic of the fractious and divided nature of the current Tory party?
Well, that's a question, isn't it? I think it's a bit of both, but definitely the latter. I would lean towards the latter. Um, Tories are all over the place, and there are now so many factions. And I read recently that Boris had a majority of about 90, and they reckon that Liz Truss's majority is going down to about 11, and that Boris is just waiting in the wings to glide back in and save the country from Liz Truss, another Tory government. It seems if anyone had sat down to write this story, I think no publisher would have accepted it because they would have described it as pure fantasy. But we're all living through this now, and we need. I want to hope that she'll actually do a better job than Johnson, but she seems to want to carry on, and also then to have more people in her cabinet that are like Johnson. They're just sycophants, people who supported her, and she hasn't reached out and tried to help the country by broadening her base. So it's only people that supported her that are going to appear in her cabinet, and the backbenches are going to be full of people to do her down. And that is absolute way to seriously try to run a country. It's
That's a bit.
worrying in the extreme. And
That's that's
yeah, it's really going to be awful.
that absolutely, Marion, and we'll look at the cabinet as well in a moment. But when she spoke in Downing Street, Liz Truss said, "History will see Boris Johnson as a hugely consequential prime minister." Now, I suppose consequential is a good word, isn't it? Boris had consequences. One of them is Liz Truss in Downing Street. But that's the second time she's lionised Johnson in 24 hours. So is she signalling that she's just continuity Johnson? She's perhaps just minding the shop for him before he returns?
I'm not sure if she's doing that exactly, but she's trying to still talk to the Tory party who voted her in, the Tory membership rather than the MPs, because don't forget, she didn't have a majority of MPs supporting her bid for leadership, and it's the Tory shires that voted her in. So they like loyalty. They like Boris. I mean, the polls showed that they'd rather have him than appoint a new leader. So she has to still keep them on side. But her real difficulty is actually going to be trying to focus Tory MPs into actually allowing Tory party to stay in power at Westminster. And as we approach an election, latest in 2024, then we actually will find Tory, they'll be quite happy to throw Liz Truss under the bus if they think that she won't actually get them re-elected. And it's all about Tory party politics and speaking to big businesses, Tory donors, folk in the shires, and it's not about looking at the state of the country and doing sensible, proportional things that will actually help the most people in the UK to actually survive this crisis. And that's what's really, really worrying. I think everyone knew Liz Truss was going to win way out, and to actually not have a plan ready to go. And presumably they have been doing some work on it, but she's had to change tack so often during her campaign that where is she going to go with things? There's no clear idea of what she's going to do. But even today, though, she was still talking about tax cuts, and that only benefits folk who pay tax in the first place.
Absolutely, Marion. Thank you. Thinking also of what Liz Truss said from outside Number 10 Downing Street, she said, "We will transform Britain into an aspiration nation with high-paying jobs, safe streets." Now, what I think she means is that never mind all the doom and gloom. What we need is rhyming slogans, and all will be well. However, rather more seriously, having to transform Britain sounds like a rather damning indictment of 12 years of Tory government. And she's not exactly quoting St. Francis of Assisi, is she?
Well, thank goodness for that. I mean, she might have tried to do that as a Thatcher light. It's absolutely she's going to. No one knows yet how much substance there is to what she says, and more importantly, how much substance is there going to be to what she proposes to do. And that's where everybody needs to have a bit better idea what's happening. So she didn't come on and announce things like rent freeze, no more evictions, let's actually help people. She's just talking in platitudes, and that's really worrying.
Absolutely, it was the speech. I certainly thought that the speech was very light on content, and it could have been written by artificial intelligence. Was the takeaway I had from it. But let's have a look at the potential Liz Truss cabinet now, because we're seeing this evening news starting to break that Dominic Raab, Grant Shapps, Steve Barclay are all sacked from Cabinet within about an hour of Truss entering number 10, and they were three of the most prominent front benchers. Liz Truss is expected to appoint a cabinet of loyalist MPs as her government begins a race against time to set out plans to deal with the cost of living emergency. The Prime Minister is expected to announce plans for an energy price freeze on Thursday as she battles to navigate an overwhelming in-tray during the worst economic crisis in at least a generation. She faces an uphill struggle to win over Tory MPs as she inherits a deeply divided party lagging behind in the polls, with some mutinous backbenchers who are already said to be plotting her demise. Kwasi Kwarteng, her closest cabinet ally, will become her Chancellor, and she is also expected to confirm appointments of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary and James Cleverly as Foreign Secretary. Those appointments will mean that for the first time there will be no white men in the four great offices of state. Jacob Rees-Mogg is expected to take on responsibility for energy and climate change after Liz Truss struggled to find a dedicated minister to fill the role amid concerns over his scepticism. It is being reported that the controversial minister, a survivor from the Johnson administration, will fulfil the function of the junior minister in addition to his new role as business secretary. Two Conservative MPs are already understood to have turned down the role of energy minister, while the incumbent, Greg Hands, has not been told whether he will remain in post, and the COP26 chair Alok Sharma's future is unclear. Rishi Sunak is not expected to be offered a job in her cabinet, and it's a break from the tradition whereby most unsuccessful leadership contenders have been offered posts. Priti Patel and Nadine Dorries both announced that they would quit as Home and Culture Secretaries and return to the backbenches. The Cabinet Office Minister Nigel Adams and Tory Party co-chair Ben Elliott have also announced their resignations. Even though new Prime Ministers generally expect a bounce in the polls, any political honeymoon is likely to be very short-lived, with an overflowing in-tray of thorny issues including the prospect of an autumn of strikes, the NHS and ambulance service on their knees in England and Wales, the conflict in Ukraine showing no sign of easing, and an ongoing row with Brussels over how to implement Brexit in Northern Ireland. So the first point, Marion, here is that Gavin Barwell, who was the number 10 Chief of Staff, tweeted that if the pre-briefing is right and what we're now hearing is correct, she risks repeating Boris Johnson's mistake of favouring allies, and it will be one of the least experienced cabinets in modern times. He said that matters because reuniting the party is easier if she spreads senior jobs rather than just rewarding her allies. And secondly, he says that because the country is about to face multiple crises, it needs the most talented people from the governing party in government, not on the backbenches. He says that the Chancellor and Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, James Cleverly and Suella Braverman, will be among the least experienced to have held those roles. So is the former Tory party spad Gavin Barwell correct in his analysis? Firstly, about the chances of reuniting the Tory party, and secondly, about the ever-decreasing puddle of talent in the Tory cabinet?
Yeah, I never thought I'd say the magic words, I agree with Gavin Barwell, but I do. I think it's obvious that where you're having a huge crisis that really needs dealt with immediately, and you've got four really inexperienced cabinet secretaries now, it's absolutely not going to work. And I think the whole thing about I never thought I'd publicly say we need the party to stick together and we need people. We need certainty and we need experience at a time like this. And all the experience, as you've already said, is on the backbenches. And there's no certainty that the backbenches are going to be docile and vote with the government. And that's really, really worrying because the one thing that the UK needs is a totally functioning government to try and steer us right through what are going to be very, very waters in this and year ahead. And that's not apparently what we're going to get. Absolutely need this government to work. We need it to look at the problems and come up with sensible, fixable solutions because we need people not to be worried. We need people to actually not to fear turning on lights. We need people to absolutely not fear turning on heating. We need people to be able to eat and actually live. Okay, we all know it's going to be tough. And that's fair enough, because not all of the crisis is made in the UK. That there are things internationally that have not helped things, But the own goal of Brexit has made things much, much worse. And actually, when you think of the divergence even in temperature between the north of Scotland and the south of England, we know what it's like to feel cold, and we know how much more it's going to impact on Scotland. If you have to spend your money on trying to keep warm and you don't eat, then things are just not going to work for anyone. And this is what worries me. There's so many people who are so worried about what's going to happen, or what they think is going to happen, without help from the UK government. It just doesn't bear thinking about. And that's my job. That's a job of all MPs, of all parties, to actually call this government to account. She hasn't even announced yet when she'll have an emergency budget. She's keeping everyone waiting when she's had quite a wee while in the run up to her selection to actually have plans in place.
Thank you, Marion. Absolutely, we've heard nothing from the government for 8 weeks over the summer. And just briefly in passing, before we move on to the next item, William Hill are saying that the odds are that Liz Truss will have a shorter premiership than Theresa May, who served just over 1,100 days. They said this afternoon, we don't expect her to last very long in office. They've got her at 4 to 6 on to be in charge for less time than Theresa May, and they're not totally ruling out her serving the shortest reign in history. The odds on that are 50 to 1. And just one wee thing, I checked this afternoon, the last possible date for the next general election is the 23rd of January 2025. Now, I know that Liz Truss is saying 2024, but 23rd of January 2025 is only 870 days away. So it certainly feels like the days are numbered. But let's look at another of Liz Truss's potential policies now, because she risks igniting another row with the EU, which could lead to tariffs on British exports if she tries to dilute workers' rights too much, legal experts and union leaders have said. The new Prime Minister is reportedly considering a review of workers' rights as part of a wider bonfire of 1,500 EU laws she wants to take off the UK's statute books before the end of next year. Under the level playing field agreements in the Brexit trade and cooperation deal, sealed by Lord Frost with the EU, the UK can deviate from EU rules, but not diverge to such an extent that it gives the UK a business advantage over rivals on the continent and Ireland. Catherine Barnard, the Professor of EU Law at the University of Cambridge and a Brexit expert, said the deal allowed safeguards, including tariffs, to be imposed by either side if the playing field was unlevelled. The deal allows the UK to diverge from EU rules on workers' rights, but if the divergence affects trade and investment, then the EU can start the non-regression procedure against the UK. This involves consultation, followed by the establishment of a special panel and ultimately retaliation against the UK if the UK is found to be in breach. That means tariffs, the professor said. Workers' rights, including maximum weekly hours, equal pay, holiday and rest rights, are enshrined in laws retained from the EU, including the Working Time Directive. As the self-styled Brexit delivery Prime Minister, Truss's proposed timetable to get rid of some of the EU laws has been accelerated, with promises to scrap all remaining EU regulations by the end of 2023. But diverging significantly on rights would not just add tensions to the already strained relations with the EU, it may also prompt a major row with the unions. The TUC has demanded assurances from the government that hard-won workers' rights are not in the line of fire after statements from Jacob Rees-Mogg. As the Brexit Opportunities Minister in Boris Johnson's government, Rees-Mogg promised a bonfire of EU rules with a 5-year expiry date or sunset clause on the same 1,500 pieces of EU legislation. He told ministers it would reduce the burden of regulation on business, prompting unions to call for guarantees that workers' rights were not among them. So, Marion, the Secretary-General of the TUC, Francis O'Grady, said, threatening hard-won workers' rights is the last thing the country and working people need. holiday pay, equal pay, safe limits on working hours, and parental leave are just a few of the rights underpinned. These are all essential, not a nice to have. So, Marion, should we be worried that Truss and Rees-Mogg are apparently planning to strip all of us of some of our essential rights?
We should all be extremely worried about that. It's former trade unionist. I still believe, I was a trade union official for a number of years. If you treat people better, they work better. It's common sense. And to go to war with the trade unions on one hand, and to go almost to war with the EU, doing away with the right guaranteed they would keep, it just makes no sense. Because if we start to have embargoes and we start to have real issues with the EU, we will end up being in an even worse position than we are now. And it just does not seem to actually seep through the hard right Tory mentality that, the days of rule Britannia have gone. We need cooperation if we want. If as she says, it's UK to be an aspirational, then she's not going to get it if she's at war with the Union side and if we're subject to EU sanctions on another. It makes no sense. So it does make sense if you just want to grind people and go for the lowest. That's fine to do it, but not for what she's doing. Sound bites promising and dawn and how having to be wonderful, and then she's doing stuff or proposing to do stuff that's really the opposite of what she's saying she wants to happen. Go figure.
Absolutely, Marion. We're going to continue to try and figure it out. But employment law came up in another way today because the SNP MP Angela Crawley led a debate in Westminster today on the merits of Scotland gaining control of employment law. The debate follows the UK government's failure to commit to an employment bill in this year's Queen's speech.
Yeah.
In the debate, the MP for Lanark and Hamilton exposed Westminster's appalling track record on workers' rights, saying that it is only by employment laws coming to Holyrood that we can improve employment law and protect workers' rights in Scotland. Commenting, Angela Crawley MP said, "The Westminster Tory government has a poor track record when it comes to protecting workers' rights and lifting people in work out of poverty. It has had multiple chances to do the right thing and bring in an employment bill, and it has refused to do so, making it clear that the only way we can enhance workers' rights and tackle in-work poverty in Scotland is by ensuring full employment powers rest with the Scottish Government." She went on to say independence would allow Scotland to go even further and create fairer workplaces, increase wages, reduce insecure work, and fundamentally tackle in-work poverty head on. Now, Marion, it struck me that I was going to ask you how much prospect there was of devolution of employment law to Scotland, given how all unionists, Labour in particular, opposed the devolution of employment law when it was proposed in the context of the Smith Commission not that long ago.
Yeah, and Labour are moving further to the right, if I can put it like that, down here. Keir Starmer is so scared of upsetting Middle England that he's willing to go along with some of the worst excesses of previous Tory governments, and no doubt this one. He won't want to frighten the horses. There doesn't seem to be any notion of the whole idea that if you treat people decently and you give them decent rights, then everyone benefits. It's this idea that you can treat people badly. And what's happening just now, I mean, I love Alison Thulis's wonderful phrase. It's the UK government's pretendy living wage. They think that what they've done is huge. And I can remember George Osborne standing talking about we'll have a living wage and we'll have, a better minimum wage. And what happens is that they don't actually mean it. They think it's best to pay people as little as you can possibly get away with, and suddenly everything will be better. And what happens in situations, and what has been happening, is that we now have a new whole swathe of people who are working poor. Why in anybody's vision of anything is it right that people work 40 hours a week and can't support their families because they are paid so little, and the rest of it, taxpayers, have to top up their wages through universal credit because big corporations especially won't pay a decent living wage? Where's the sense in any of that? Where's the dignity in any of that?
Absolutely, Marion. It beats me. Let's have a look at employment law from a slightly different perspective, though, now to carry on this conversation, because President Biden has used a Labor Day speech in the battleground state of Wisconsin to endorse the expansion of trade unions, reiterating his election promises to be the most pro-union president in American history. The US president argued in Milwaukee that a skilled, unionized workforce would help the US regain its place as a world leader in infrastructure and manufacturing. Drawing on Franklin D. Roosevelt's explicit support for unions during the New Deal, President Biden said, "I am encouraging unions. We need key worker protections to build an economy from the bottom up and middle out. I am sick and tired of trickle-down economics." The president's comments come amid a major resurgence for the labour movement in the US, with more support for unions than at any time in the past 60 years, especially as low-paid workers across a range of industries try unionising. The president's use of the word Trumpies lit up social media. President Biden was largely referring to his predecessor by name in public or taking direct aim at his loyalist voter base. However, last month he referred to the phenomenon of extremist Republicans hewing unshakably to Trump's Make America Great Again nationalist agenda amid a current encouragement of political violence, and he referred to it as semi-fascism. Then last week he said that the US was in a battle for the soul of the nation. So, Marion, in terms of President Biden drawing on Franklin D. Roosevelt's support for unions during the New Deal and saying that he encourages unions and he needs key worker protections to build the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, this is the polar opposite of, I think, what you and I understand to be what I'm going to call Trussonomics.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, her idea of cutting taxes for the rich so that, the the money they spend will be everyone will benefit. Well, that's not been proven at all. And most economists, that's just nonsensical. I mean, I'm not an economist and I never want to be an economist, but I'd see no sense in it. If you cut taxes to the richest people, then that does not benefit those at the bottom. And cutting taxes gives no incentive and gives no benefit to those at the very bottom. Lots of people in this country still do not pay taxes. And when she cuts taxes for the very richest, who the only people who benefit are the very richest. And that's no way to look at that. There has been a nastiness ever since, I think, Osborne and Cameron started being pejorative about people on benefits. I don't know many folk on benefits who want to be there. They want to earn enough to keep their families. But the amount of swindling or people who are on benefits who shouldn't be and who are making fraudulent claims pales into insignificance with the amount of get rich, stay rich, we'll put our money somewhere else, folk that do all this to actually stop paying taxes that they should pay. And large companies, large international companies like Amazon, who actually who pay minuscule amounts of tax in this country, and there's been half-hearted attempts over 7 years that I've been here to try and stop that. But I do not believe for a minute there's a attempt to make people who can afford pay more, and companies who are exploiting workers pay more. It seems to me entirely the wrong way to try and make the build up people and get people better paid jobs if you don't have at your disposal from tax to do so. It just seems all wrong.
Thank you, Marion. We'll come back to Westminster for our next story, though, because the BBC's chairman has denied claims by former Newsnight presenter Emily Maitlis that a former Downing Street director of communications is acting as an agent of the Conservative Party inside the corporation. Richard Sharp told MPs that Maitlis was completely wrong in categorising Robbie Gibb as an active agent of the Conservative Party on the BBC's board. Appearing before the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee, the BBC chairman, a former Tory party donor, insisted the BBC was insulated from political influence. We cherish the editorial independence of the BBC, he said. He added, just to be categorical, he, meaning Gibb, does not operate on the board as an agent of the Conservative Party. That was completely wrong. It was one of the errors that Emily Maitlis made in her lecture, and I'm very disappointed that she made that particular point. The BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, confirmed that the BBC got almost daily feedback from the government on its output. He said calls from ministers led to reflection at the BBC, not panic. Mr Davie said that Robbie Gibb had not complained about the comedian Joe Lycett on BBC's new Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg programme when he ridiculed Liz Truss's responses to Laura Kuenssberg's questioning. So, Marion, Richard Sharp told MPs that Maitlis was completely wrong and that Gibb was not an active agent of the Conservative Party. He would say that. Sharp was an advisor to Boris Johnson when Johnson was mayor. He was an advisor to Rishi Sunak as Chancellor and has donated more than £400,000 to the Conservative Party. Is the welding together of Downing Street and the British Broadcasting Corporation a growing problem?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's a growing problem. I mean, Nadine Dorris is gone, but their victimisation or their attacks on Channel 4, for example, it would appear, and I'm not an expert by any manner of means on this, that let's say Tory ministers and the Tory party want almost control of media, and they don't want anything that actually brings them out in a bad light. Now, I don't know if Emily Maitlis was absolutely correct in what she says, but she worked there. I didn't. And she must have a better notion of what was going on. And when they tried to influence they had to give up on one Tory donor, and one Tory person they tried to put on. They had to give up on that because of the Appointments Commission. Now, it's just worrying. It's if we have a free press and don't have email that would be free one political in Scotland, how much support is for the party. It just we need free who are able to influence on programmes, not if it's one political party over another. Nobody wins in an era like that.
That's a very good point, Marion. Thank you. And what we'll do is we'll come back to Scotland for our final item this evening, because a record number of school buildings across Scotland are now in a good or satisfactory condition. The proportion of schools reported as being in this category has reached 90.4%, according to the Schools Estate Statistics 2022. This is 29 percentage points higher than in April 2007. The number of pupils educated in good or satisfactory condition schools has also reached 91.7%, and that's an increase of almost 31% since April 2007. Other figures show the number of children now receiving free school meals has reached a record high of 215,053. That's after the Scottish Government extended the offer to help more families in need. The Education Secretary, Shirley-Ann Somerville, said, "We now have a record number of schools in good or satisfactory condition. Our long-term commitment to education, in partnership with local government, is clear through our £2 billion Learning Estate Investment Programme, which will benefit 50,000 learners across Scotland." So, Marion, 54 schools were either built or refurbished in 2021-22. That's during the pandemic. Of these, 48 were primary schools, 5 were secondary schools, and 1 was a special school. So building or refurbishing 54 schools during a pandemic sounds to me like delivering.
Yes, indeed, and I can see that in my own constituency. Perhaps not just in the latest builds, but I know many number of schools in my constituency that have actually either almost razed to the ground and rebuilt, or just entirely refurbished, or just brand new schools opening. For example, they managed to rebuild one secondary school and actually turn it into an age 3 to 18 campus by it was a primary school, 2 primary schools closed. That moved on to the same site, and they opened a nursery on the site at the same time. And the facilities and the buildings themselves are just excellent. Now, that just didn't happen. That's been as a result of commitment to education in Scotland, because you can't educate pupils the same in a failing old building. I mean, uh, education now is for the 21st century. Uh, the way that we teach now has totally changed since I was at school, and that's a good thing, because we're now trying to educate people to think and to be able to work with each other and to move forward. We're not going back to the old days where you just sat on a bench and recited things. We're trying to teach people to be creative and to think for themselves. And that's really, and to have that kind of education, you need decent buildings to have it in. So that's, I mean, all praise to the Scottish Government working in conjunction with local authorities. That's what they've done. And those figures can't be refuted. I think if you listen to Parliament here in Westminster, all the government ministers and all Tory backbench Scottish MPs want to do is run down Scottish education. And because they repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, people start to think that what they're saying is actually true. Whereas this is an example, when you look at what they've done to the estates, actually completely refutes that idea.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marion. And also, in terms of education, briefly, the expansion in the number of free school meals being provided, as you say, by collaboration between the Scottish Government and local authorities, do you think will that continue to have a positive impact on the learning experience of young people?
Absolutely. Many years ago, I was on the Education Select Committee at Westminster, and we went to Finland and to South Korea to look at what they were doing there. And actually, in Finland, every single child in Finland has free school meals, free, really good school meals, and they think it's absolutely imperative that children are well fed in order that they learn. And we have adopted some of that here. It would be much easier if we were an independent country and we had the levers and the economic levers to help. But within the restricted budgets that the Scottish Government has, they have spent wisely in making sure that children in primary schools get to eat decent meals for free. Now that's important, and it's going to be even more important going forward, the cost of living crisis. And the fact that there's many programmes now that feed children all summer, and I know that happens locally in my area and across Scotland, and it doesn't happen in the rest of the UK. It doesn't happen in England. It took Marcus Rashford, a footballer, to try to shame Boris Johnson into introducing free school meals and feeding children over the summer holidays. And even that's fallen by the wayside, I understand, more recently.
Thank you, Marion. A very good point, well made there. However, that, I'm afraid, is all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you'd like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. And while you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. I'd like to thank everyone who has been watching, and I'd like to give a very special thank you to our very special guest this evening, Marion Fellows MP. Thanks, Marion.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. My pleasure.
It's been our pleasure to have you on the programme this evening, Marion. I'm reminded that on this day in 1965, Tom Johnson, who had served as Secretary of State for Scotland between 1941 and 1945, died in Milngavie. He is best remembered for his role in driving ahead the large hydroelectric schemes across the Highlands. I wonder sometimes why so few politicians have learned from the success of those initiatives 80 years ago. But that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.